Not at all.
So as you realize, we could talk for the whole day just about AI and its implications, or quantum computing, or CRISPR, or any of the technological advances that will change the way we live our lives. But rather than do that, I'll talk to you about how do we better anticipate the impacts any of these technologies have. Basically, how do we think with more clarity? And I start with what has happened to me many times. Something happens and we are unprepared and we are surprised. And in hindsight, what happened oftentimes has felt obvious to me. So how come am I surprised and unprepared for something that in hindsight feels obvious? That should not be. Of course, because there were some unknowns in what happened, at least unknown to me. And there are two types of unknowns. There are unknowns that I cannot know about. I call those unknowable unknowns. And then there are unknowns that are knowable in advance, and these are the frustrating animals that I should have understood and realized. So what are the unknowable unknowns? They are things that happen by accident, for example. The invention of penicillin, which was a result of poor hygiene in a lab. You couldn't anticipate that. Or things like figuring out the fourth flavor of quarks, which is charm. And this happened in a particle accelerator where sort of new physics had to be invented to explain the results. You couldn't anticipate that. There was no existing theory. But most things that happen are somewhere sort of in the gray area between unknowable and knowable, such as solar flares. They can be predicted, but very poorly at the moment. Or a global pandemic. The scientists have been talking about the certainty of a pandemic for decades. But we human beings, we mix up the short time frame and the long time frame. We think that the likelihood of a pandemic breaking out next month is very, very low, so I don't need to do anything. Even if I know that the likelihood over a few decades is close to 100%. And therefore we are unprepared for something that we should know will happen. And there are things that we can do in our organizations to be better prepared for the unknowable. We build agility into the way we work. Oftentimes it looks like we are building immobility rather than agility. But by focusing on what does agility mean, we can be better prepared for something that is unknowable, that takes us by storm. But the more interesting area is the knowable unknowns. So things such as the internet. The ARPANET started already in the 60s. TCP/IP was invented in 1983. The World Wide Web in 1991. And you can ask yourself, at what stage should we predicted what will happen, at least in terms of our business or our societies? And the more clarity we have in the way we analyze the trends behind these technological advances, the better we are able to predict and preempt, and maybe build huge businesses, because we understood before the others what the implications of these new technologies will be. The financial crisis, I mean, the signs were there. We all know that. We, at least in the front row, we all lived through that. And the signs were all there. And yet, some wealth was created, but much more wealth was destroyed. So not everybody was in the knowledge. Or the dot-com bubble. Definitely lived through that myself. And all the signs were there. It was just completely crazy. Just like believing that zero interest rates would continue forever. Completely crazy. Nobody in their right minds would believe that. But many did. Kodak, a company that was bankrupted by an invention that it did itself. Kodak invented the digital camera. And the performance of a digital camera improved based on semiconductor trends, so Moore's law. And after 10 years of improvement in the 80s, you could easily extrapolate that if this trend continues, and why wouldn't it? Because Moore's law was proving to be pretty solid. There will be a moment in time when the digital camera will outperform the film camera. And after that, it will just keep on getting better. And yet, the company that invented the device was bankrupted by its own invention. How is that possible? We are oftentimes complacent, we are intellectually lazy, we are distracted by so many things on the executive desktop that we don't have time to stop and reflect and think. And that is something that you can now learn and be much better than executives in some other companies. So agility in your operations is the foundation on top of which you can build disciplines, toolboxes, ways of working to better address the knowable unknowns. Using scenario planning, we could talk about that for quite a long time, but you can study that separately. Thinking not just about the first level impacts of an event or change or technology, but also the second level, and maybe even the third level impacts. Because oftentimes it's not the first level that will impact your business. You are in the second or third level of impacts. And you iterate. And you iterate in multiple dimensions. You go future back, from present to future, top down. You invite people to participate bottom up. And you always learn something that you can use in the other dimensions. And the more you practice, the better you get. This is a muscle. Clarity of thinking is a muscle. And organizational clarity of thinking is a muscle that you can build to be better prepared and avoid being unprepared. So what are the kind of things that we should be looking at right now? There are many long-term trends that will impact your success that are visible now, just like the digital camera improvement was visible to the Kodak executives for a couple decades before they went bankrupt. One is obviously Moore's law that is now slowing down. It's changing. What will be the impact of that? At least one thing we can say that there's a market for quantum computing because the current paradigm is slowing down. An interesting one, the speed of networking. On this exponential scale, logarithmic scale, it's a linear progression, which means that in real life it has been an exponential progression. And if you think just about this one slide, go back 10 years, let's say to 2008, and you can see that the progression had been linear for a couple decades, almost 3 decades. If you had believed then that it will continue linear, what kind of new business domains could you have predicted and been a pioneer in? Businesses such as cloud services, a 500 billion business, in value more than 5 trillion just by these businesses. Music streaming completely transformed the industry. TV, movies being streamed today, completely new, just based on improved telecommunications. Online gaming, instant messaging, you can keep on and on. All those could have been predicted just by staring at that one slide 15 years ago, if you had clarity of thinking. Technology is the biggest value creator in the world by far. I tried to find out how to measure this, and I used as a proxy the global value of all publicly listed companies. And if I take the tech sector, according to the best data that I could find, which could be false, because there are no perfect statistics about this, but 10 years ago, the global value of tech companies publicly listed was about 5 trillion. In 2023, last spring, it was 24 trillion. So 19 trillion of new value had been created, 400% growth. All the other business domains grew by 40% in that 10-year period. So tech grew 10 times the speed of all other businesses. And think about now we are at the early stages of AI and quantum computing and CRISPR and many other technologies. Could you believe that that value growth would slow down? Doesn't really make sense. If it would keep at the same absolute growth level, 19 trillion of new value would be created over the next 10 years. If it would keep the same speed, 60 trillion of new value would be created. If it would keep the same acceleration, the number would be so astronomical that it doesn't make any sense anymore. So the question is, who will participate in that value creation? I've been talking to many politicians about this. What does your country do in order to take a bigger share than you would deserve out of that value creation? This is the biggest value creator in the world for the foreseeable future. And these are like trends that if you find a way to participate, it will not let you down. It's like a strong wind behind your back, pushing you forward. You can even make big mistakes and you will still win. Quantum computing, no doubt about it, will revolutionize a lot of things. That's an interesting topic that we could discuss almost as long as this one. And the interesting thing here is, keeping it very brief, what did department stores learn from the internet? They learned that when a department store creates a web shop, they don't become an e-commerce company. They thought they were becoming an e-commerce company by just setting up a web shop. It doesn't work like that. An e-commerce company is organized differently, different roles, different processes, different tools, different ways of thinking, different people being recruited. You don't become competitive in e-commerce by setting up a web shop. The same applies to AI. You don't become competitive by just replacing individual manual processes with AI. You gain some productivity, you do some cost savings, but against the companies that are built to take advantage of these new technologies, you will not be competitive. There are many other trends. One that we discussed this morning with my colleague George is demographics. And the UN forecast for China is that they will have 700 million by the end of the century. And this is not the lowest number. The lowest number that they had was 400 million. And think about the impacts globally, but especially for China. In in South Korea, a female person on average had 0.83 babies in 2019, these 2019 statistics. Today it's probably a little bit lower. These are trends that will just continue. They won't change very quickly. People over 50 now account for more than half of the world's consumer spending. What does that mean? It's growing. It will have an impact on many businesses, and the people who connect the dots, they will win more than the ones that don't. And the interesting thing is that when you are right and nobody agrees with you, that's when you win big. When you are right and everybody agrees with you, then you're just doing what others do. And of course, if you are wrong and everybody disagrees with you, that's not a good place to be in. But this is why thinking clearly in advance is so useful. If you realize something before the others, then you are right, and most people disagree with you. And that's a good place to be at. And things like Russia and a couple other countries in the world have practiced removing their internet from the global internet. They have built a capacity for cutting the subsea cables, And there are only a little bit over 20 cables connecting the US and Europe, for example. Russia has 160 submarines. It would be very easy to cut those 25 cables. What would that mean? Has anybody really thought about that? For many businesses, that might destroy your operational systems. People aged 65 or older will be 40% of the population in Japan by 2050. What does that mean? So how does all this relate to strategy? Thinking and acting like we have now discussed will help you create a better strategy. But also building the agility and the capabilities that we have discussed will make you much better in executing that strategy. So it's a win-win. As a request to you, if you can think of some technology trends, as that's today's topic, that would be especially illustrative about what will happen in the future, let me know. I'd love to get some feedback and ideas from you. And if this got any of your synapses firing, take some action. If you don't do anything, this is just theory, worthless. That's the case for CEOs. If you just think and don't do anything, it doesn't matter. So you need to take action. And it's up to you to decide what you want your impact to be. Thank you.